Dear friends, fighters for human rights, it is an honor that I feel that I can stand here today and ask one incredible woman to come forward and receive the 2020 Geneva Summit International's Women's Rights Award. It is easy to speak like me as a politician coming from a democratic country for other people's human rights and to try to defend them. But to speak out as a regular citizen, being yourself the victim of oppression and discrimination in a totalitarian theocracy, this is profoundly dangerous and, in the same extent, heroic. After this was not enough, it is also even more heroic when you have a lot to risk. And as a mother of 3 children, I can only imagine what our awardee went through, having her son to worry about on top of it all. Therefore, I'm very happy to declare that this year, the 25 human rights groups that sponsor the Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy have chosen to recognize the extraordinary efforts of Shaparak Shajarizadeh, an Iranian woman who had the courage to speak out against violence of women's human rights and was jailed, beaten, and brutalized for her defiance. She is an outspoken figure of the White Wednesday movement that shows resistance against the hijab law in Iran. A compulsory dress code under penalties such as lashes and imprisonment is the visible symbol of oppression of women because it erases the women's freedom of choice. And as a woman, my admiration goes beyond words for Shaparak, who has suffered abysmal mistreatment, for daring to demand to live in accordance with her choices of relationships, her choice whom to marry, how to live, if to divorce, to travel freely alone, to take the job she wants to. Shaparak has not only proven her remarkable courage in exercising civil disobedience, but also has shown an honorable sense of solidarity with her lawyer, Nasrin Sotoudeh. As a result of defending women such as her, Nasrin has been charged for 38 years and 148 lashes for her fight for equality and freedom. Knowing just a fraction of the great things that you have done, Shaparak, I can only say you deserve nothing but our respect, gratitude, and admiration for fighting for women's rights at great risk to yourself and your family. It is to women such as you who speak out and refuse to be muted that women have gained their freedoms and rights. You have reached out to the international community and ensured that the world knows, because if the world is not right, it must be made right. For this, you made it listen. Thank you, dear Shaparak.
I would like to thank the Geneva Summit for this award, which I accept with great honor on behalf of the brave Iranian women who are risking their lives on a daily basis to get back their dignity, and all the women around the world who are fighting for freedom and equality and continue to give me the motivation to follow their path. Thank you for listening to my pain when there is so few ears in my own country to care for what we call humanity. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. 2 years ago, I had an interview with a Canadian journalist, and she asked me if I expected anything from the world. In tears, I told her that I wanted the world to know about the repression on Iranian women and the regime's systematic violence against women, and that I expect the world to stand in solidarity with us, the people of Iran. That day, I never imagined that I would be here among the world's greatest human rights defenders, sharing my story and receiving this incredible award. As an Iranian woman, I've been exposed to violence and inequality in every aspect of my life. In Iran, women don't have the right to choose who they want to be. Women are not treated as free individual human beings. I've always believed in civil disobedience and peaceful resistance. Always fascinated by the suffragette movement, I knew women's rights activists didn't get anywhere in Iran because they were alone with no support from even ordinary women like me. So I decided to do something and joined the White Wednesday civil disobedience movement to oppose Iran's compulsory hijab law, which requires women to wear a headscarf in public even if it goes against their will. For 40 years, the Islamic regime used hijab as a tool to repress women, enabling their forces and followers to abuse, violent, and subjugate women. This has prevented Iranian women from having any important role in society. I was first arrested on February 21st, 2018, because of my involvement with the White Wednesday, a campaign encouraging men and women to post images on social media of themselves, either wearing white or no headscarf, to protest Iran's compulsory hijab law. Can you imagine? I was arrested for the crime of waving a white flag of peace in the street, only to be punished by the regime and detained in Qarchak prison. I was beaten up and brutalized during the interrogation and thrown into solitary confinement. It was the most frightening experience in my life. I not only felt extreme physical pain, but also real emotional distress. I was released on bail only after being on a hunger strike. Then on March 17, I was arrested again with my husband for exposing the brutality that I experienced in Qarchak prison. The authorities eventually transported us to the notorious Evin prison for further interrogation and accused of being spies. I represent no one but myself, but I have a platform now that many others don't have. So from my experience, I want to share the truth. Inside Iranian courtrooms, there is no law. There is no justice. Inside Iranian prisons, there is no humanity or passion. On May 1st, a few months after the second arrest, I was on a vacation with my 9-year-old son. When I was arrested for the third time, the state authorities interrogated me in front of my innocent child and handcuffed me while he was crying, begging, and screaming, and asking them to let us go home. That evening in the courthouse, he cried himself to sleep on my lap on a cold stone bench. At that moment, I told myself that I wouldn't let this happen to my family ever again. When my lawyer, Nasrin Sotoudeh, got me out on bail in May 2018, I immediately fled the country with my son, and my trial proceeded without me. Nasrin informed me that throughout the trial, the judge refused to hear my side and had already made his mind up. My fate was predetermined, as it had been for so many of the women who stood trial before me. However, unlike those women, and thanks to Nasrin, I was safely outside the country with my son. 3 days after representing me at my trial, Nasrin was arrested for the crime of being a member of a human rights organization and advocating for women's rights. She was wrongly accused of propaganda against the state and encouraging prostitution. In summer 2018, the government arrested many human rights lawyers who were detained for months. Some got released on bail. Others got sentenced to prison for decades. Nasrin got 38 years and 148 lashes. Amir Salar Dawoodi got 30 years and 111 lashes. Mohammad Najafi, 14 years. My point is that arresting human rights lawyers and threatening innocent people who reject the government illustrate the total absence of freedom of expression and speech in Iran. In the past 2 years, Iran's regime has violated international human rights law yet again, but by approving only about 20 lawyers out of more than 20,000 across the country to represent anyone charged with so-called security or political crimes. At the same time, the regime continues to charge more and more activists with such crimes. Since last year's November's uprising in Iran, the number of people charged with fake crimes is now in the thousands. What does this mean? It's simple. In short, contrary to international law, those charged with security and political crimes are simply not afforded legal representation. And if this was not enough, the regime continues to throw more lawyers like Nasrin Sotoudeh in prison. In 2019, the government arrested many other women who were opposing compulsory hijab. When I was in jail, a woman named Mojgan Keshavars told my story in public. In buses and in subway trains, she would say, Shaparak is a mother away from her 9-year-old son. Now I tell you here, Mojgan is a mother away from her 9-year-old daughter and is going to be in prison for years. Also, Sabah Kordafshari and her mother, Rahele Ahmadi. Yasaman Aryani and her mother, Monire Arabshahi, and the list goes on. None of these innocent women had a lawyer during arrest, interrogations, and imprisonments. None of these innocent women had a chance to have a fair trial. Last November, Iranian government killed more than 1,500 people on the streets in 3 days and arrested 7,000 protesters. None of them have access to a lawyer or a fair trial. 2 years ago, I was lucky to have a lawyer like Nasrin. I didn't have a fair trial, but Nasrin did her best to advocate for me. I keep thinking, what is going on inside those walls, behind those doors right now, when those 7,000 protesters have nobody to represent them? For 40 years, the Iranian government charged political activists with trumped-up accusations, forcing them to get false confessions. They have executed thousands of political activists, including many children under the age of 18. None of them had a chance for a fair trial. Every year, the United Nations makes statements about human rights abuses in Iran. Politicians talk about the human rights situation in Iran. But when it comes to pressuring Iran to change, it seems human rights are forgotten and buried. Also, 3 years ago, the Vice President of the European Commission, Federica Mogherini, came to Iran. She not only obeyed compulsory hijab, but also took selfies with some of the regime's worst human rights abusers. This is unacceptable. I want the United Nations and politicians all around the world visiting Iran to stop enabling our oppressors. They should instead shine a spotlight on human rights abuses by meeting with the activists and those unjustly detained in prisons. The truth is what is really going on inside those courtrooms and prisons would shock anyone with conscience. Nazreen would tell them about the plight and pain of the innocent rights activists she defended until she became one herself. Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe would tell them about the injustice against her, about missing her daughter's early ages and milestone as she's held hostage. Narges Mohammadi would explain how she was beaten and battered for her peaceful protest. Arash Sadeghi would talk about not having medical care in prison while suffering from cancer. He's no criminal. He's a human rights activist, and he's dying a slow and torturous death in prison. I want the UN, politicians around the world, and ordinary people to stand in solidarity with human rights defenders in Iran and the Iranian people to challenge the oppressive Iranian regime. I believe there are a few ways to apply this pressure. First, all of us in this room should call on democracies in the world to target sanctions against these Iranian officials who violate human rights. Second, we must call on the United Nations to condemn Iran, to punish the Rouhani's regime, and to expose its transgressions before the world. How could the UN get Iran and other abuses a seat at the table? How could the UN allow Iran, run by a regime that believes women have no status, to be elected to the UN Commission on the Status of Women? Third, we must come together to effect real change. When I look around this room today, I'm reminded that our most powerful tool for justice is freedom, which remains out of reach for so many around the world, and especially for my sisters in Iran. We must use our freedom to help Iranian women secure theirs. We must be their voice. In doing so, we give Nazreen, Mojgan, and the women of White Wednesday the life-saving message that they had given me and so many others. You're not alone. Thank you.